The guest of Sunday Analytical is Brian Whitmore, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council and Assistant Professor of Practice in University of Texas-Arlington. Welcome to Sunday Show, Brian. Thank you for this interview. I would like to start our conversation from the meeting of Secretary of State Antony Blinken and the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. Blinken warned his Russian counterpart that if Russia moves aggressively against Ukraine, there will be severe cost for Russia. I'm quoting Blinken now. In my meeting with Foreign Minister Lavrov, I made very clear our deep concerns and our resolve to hold Russia responsible for its action, including our commitment to work with European allies to impose severe costs and consequences on Russia if it takes further aggressive actions against Ukraine. So I was quoting him. And then the same warning was given by the General Secretary of NATO, Jens Stoltenberg. We also heard the Russian president drawing red lines for the Western allies, which are, according to him, deployment of NATO troops and arms and missiles near Russia's border, meaning Ukraine. And Russia, he said, will react accordingly. Here's how I'm going to read Putin's statement. If some kind of strike system appears on the territory of Ukraine, the flight time to Moscow will be 7 to 10 minutes and 5 minutes in the case of a hypersonic weapon being deployed. Just imagine, said Putin. What are we do in such a scenario, he said. We will have to then create something similar in relations to those who threaten us in that way. And we can do that now. Brian, now let's talk about the Russian president. You are one of the best experts who can explain the actions of Kremlin boss. What is he going to do next? Is he really preparing an attack against Ukraine, or he's just bluffing?
Well, Harry, I'm not going to, you're asking me to get inside of Putin's head, which is a very dark place. And it's very difficult to see anything in that dark place. We can surmise about what we see, but this is a very, very real crisis. I think it's entirely possible that we can have renewed Russian aggression in Ukraine. And I think it's possible that it can go beyond the occupied areas in Donetsk and Luhansk. Putin has, for a long time, been very, very unhappy with the political dynamics and the way things are going in Ukraine. Remember back in May, the Ukrainian officials arrested Viktor Medvedchuk, the Ukrainian oligarch, who is a close friend of Putin, and who was one of Putin's main assets in Ukraine. He has a lot of media assets. He has a political party. He's under house arrest now, charged with high treason. That made Putin very angry. So that's one thing Putin's trying to change. The second thing is that Putin is unhappy with how the dynamics following the 2015 Minsk ceasefire have been going. What Putin was hoping to do was not to annex Donetsk and Luhansk, but to force Ukraine to take Donetsk and Luhansk back into Ukraine, but with the pro-Russian forces still armed and still in control of it. And also before Russia gave control of the border back to Ukraine. Ukraine is not, for 6 years, Ukraine's been resisting this. And it's very hard to force somebody to take territory back in if they don't want to. And that, so Putin is very unhappy because his plan, what I call his Trojan horse plan, of forcing Ukraine to take Donetsk and Luhansk back in. 2 successive Ukrainian presidents have resisted that, Petro Poroshenko and now Volodymyr Zelensky. And so Putin is trying to change the dynamic. He sees Ukraine slipping away, and he's trying to change the dynamic. I think he's very serious. My guess right now is that this is not a bluff, that this is not just brinkmanship, that he's very serious, and he's possibly going to invade Ukraine beyond the occupied areas of Donetsk and Luhansk. I fear that he may want to take everything east of the Dnipro River, and in which case we're looking at a very bloody war. Now, of course, I want to say I don't know. We cannot get inside of Putin's head right now. But all of the indications, the level of the forces that he's moving to the border, the cost of moving those forces suggests to me that this is not a bluff. So I'm very concerned about this.
So you mean a massive invasion to Ukraine is a possibility, is a real possibility?
Is a possibility. Is a possibility. I want to be very careful how I phrase this. I don't want to say, we don't, the fact of the matter is we don't know. And those who say they do know don't. The only person that knows is Putin and his closest associates. But I'm just looking at the level of forces. There's almost 100,000 of them on the border right now. You don't move that level of forces to a border without the intention of using them. And sooner or later, he's going to have to make a decision about whether or not to use them. The next couple of months are going to be very, very tense. But I fear that Putin is just very unhappy with the political dynamics in Ukraine. I think I would add that an invasion of eastern Ukraine up to the Dnipro would be a big mistake, because you're talking about occupying very, very hostile territory. You're talking about occupying Kharkiv and Dnipro and Zaporizhia, and cities that are not going to be happy about a Russian occupation. Putin continuously makes the mistake of believing that Russian-speaking Ukrainians are automatically pro-Moscow. This is not the case. I can say this with certainty. Before the pandemic, I used to go to Ukraine quite frequently. And this is not the case. Ethnicity and language do not equal political loyalty in Ukraine. So I think Putin is potentially making a mistake here. But this is a very, very dangerous moment.
Mm-hmm. So also we have to say that the Ukrainians are not Georgians, right? They are really, they have a lot of fighting experience.
Well, the thing I tell my students all the time is don't ever get in a fight with a Ukrainian, because you might win the fight, but you're going to get a broken nose and a black eye. You don't want to fight with Ukrainian. The Ukrainians are going to fight, but when you're fighting for your homeland, you're going to be a lot more fierce than when you're invading. I think the Ukrainians surprised Russia in 2014, 2015. And the Ukrainian armed forces have only gotten stronger since then, and have only gotten better organized and better equipped. They have Javelin anti-tank missiles. Now, the Ukrainians would put up a fight. Now, the Russian armed forces are a lot bigger and a lot stronger. But I don't think this is going to be a cakewalk for Russia by any stretch of the imagination. And then we have to think about what the Western response is going to be and what the costs of an invasion of Ukraine would be.
Yeah, but now we can see that the rhetoric or sharp exchange between the West and Russia is intensifying, and we hear the language that never used before, like Tony Blinken and other U.S. officials are really very openly saying that the costs, the consequences will be severe, and we can hear the same stuff from Moscow. So is this an indication that we're on the verge of new Cold War with little bit hot flavor in it?
I mean, we've been in the response from the United States and NATO is not going to be a military response. We're not going to go get into a kinetic war with a nuclear-armed Russia. But that said, the response can be very severe, and there's a lot of speculation about what Secretary Blinken meant. I mean, I have a lot. The U.S. administration is keeping their cards close to their chest about what they're going to do here. There haven't been any real leaks about what this may be, but we can surmise. These serious sanctions the United States and the allies could impose on Russia can include things like sanctioning Russian sovereign debt. So basically banning the buying and selling of Russian sovereign debt, which would be crippling to the Russian economy. Russia can potentially be excluded from the SWIFT payment system, which would inhibit the ability of any Russians to use credit cards, which also would have a severe impact on their economy. There are things we can do because we have pretty much absolute financial hegemony in this sense. So there are things we could do to impose serious, and I mean, the sanctions we've seen up until now would look like kindergarten compared to what could impose. I mean, if you could say sanctions go up to 10, we probably are up to 2 or 3 with Russia right now. There's a lot of a lot of room to sanction Russia. That's number one. Number two is U.S. force posture in Europe. Latvia is calling for permanent U.S. troop presence in that country. Poland, Lithuania, and Estonia have long been calling for a permanent U.S. troop presence in this country. If Russia invades Ukraine, you could possibly see permanent U.S. bases in Poland and in the three Baltic states. And this is something Russia absolutely does not want. But they're going to create a self-fulfilling prophecy if they invade Ukraine, because at that point, really, we're going to have no choice but to move permanent bases into Eastern Europe. So Putin may get what he has long said he fears, and long said he doesn't want. Now, from Putin's point of view, he is trying to leverage this to blackmail the West. He said, in addition to no NATO troops or weapons in Ukraine, he wants an ironclad guarantee from the United States that Ukraine can never join NATO. Now, this shows a ridiculous misunderstanding of how NATO works. NATO is not America's plaything. It's not a toy that America gets to play with and do whatever it wants with. NATO has 30 members, and NATO makes its decisions by consensus. So the United States cannot give that guarantee, first of all. And second of all, Ukraine's sovereignty belongs to the Ukrainians. It doesn't belong to the United States. It doesn't belong to NATO. It belongs to the Ukrainians and the Ukrainians alone. And we are not in this 19th century world where great powers debate the fates of smaller countries. The United States and Russia cannot make a decision about Ukraine. The Ukrainians have to be at the table for that decision. And this is something Putin always seems to ignore. He thinks there's this Russian-American committee to run the world. And this is just incorrect. The world does not work that way. And so this demand that we guarantee that Ukraine will never join NATO, we can never make that. We can never give that promise. It's just impossible.
Yeah, and now we can see the geography of potential battlefield moved from Eastern European countries to the former Soviet republics like Ukraine, Belarus, and South Caucasus. Russia is anxiously using everything in its power to prevent the West, be it in the form of European Union or NATO, from getting closer to the countries of former Soviet republics. What are you going to say about that?
Well, I mean, but again, this ignores something, again, very important, that these countries, Ukraine, Georgia, Armenia, are not little, like, chess pieces. These are countries with people that have their own agency. And what these countries want matters more than what Putin wants. If the Ukrainians want to join the NATO or the EU, that is a decision for the Ukrainians and the European Union. They are a sovereign state, sovereign people. They can make their own decisions. They have their own agency. And this is what drives me crazy about Putin's view of this, is that these countries don't really have their own agency, that they don't really have their own sovereignty, and that they can't make their own choices. So Putin sees the West gobbling up these countries. I see these countries making sovereign choices with their own agency to join the West, and that they should have that right. This isn't a chess game. This is people making decisions about their own future, and the Ukrainians have obviously made a decision about their own future, and they want to move west. So this is a decision for the Ukrainians and the West to make. It really doesn't concern Russia. It shouldn't concern Russia. So this is just, Putin has this very outdated 19th century view of the world, again, where these great powers sit down and make decisions for smaller countries. And that's just not how the world works. Putin is dreaming about a new Yalta, where he and Biden sit down at a table with a map and say, this is mine and this is yours. Well, none of it is either of ours. Ukraine belongs to the Ukrainians and nobody else.
Mm-hmm. And many believe that Russia was instrumental in the defeat of Armenia during Nagorno-Karabakh war by making possible to Azerbaijan to win the war in a dramatic fashion. Russia reportedly stopped helping Armenians during the war. It didn't provide air defense, didn't supply hardware, manpower to stop rapidly advancing Azeri troops. Anti-Russian feelings in Armenia is as high as never before. This is an unprecedented situation in that sense. Why do you think Russia abandoned its long-term ally, Armenia? Because it was afraid of losing Azerbaijan, or there was some other reason?
I mean, I was, quite frankly, as somebody that's followed Russia for my entire adult life, I was very puzzled by Russia's behavior during the hostilities in Karabakh. The only thing I can think of is that Russia saw the opportunity to come in as quote unquote peacemakers and put more troops in the Caucasus. That's one thing. The other is maybe they did not want to confront Turkey at that point. Because Turkey was also instrumental in Azerbaijan securing gains there. But I think the fallout, Harry, you're absolutely right about this. I mean, the one reason that Armenia had very good relations with Russia was this understanding that Russia was going to defend Ukraine in the event of a conflict, and Russia did not defend Ukraine. Was going to defend Armenia in the event of a conflict, and Russia did not defend Armenia in the event of that conflict. And as a result, I'm expecting kind of change in the political dynamic in Armenia. I mean, is Armenia about to become the next Georgia in this sense in the Caucasus? I mean, it's certainly taken over from Georgia as the most democratic state in the Caucasus. And I'm wondering if it's going to take over from Georgia as the most pro-Western state in the Caucasus. You would know a lot more than I would about that. But I just, when this went down, I was like, wow, Russia's going to lose Armenia in this sense, because if they are not going to defend Armenia, then why is Armenia having such good relations with Russia? Russia's behavior was very, very puzzling to me at that point.
And Russia now wants to create new platform with the participation of 6 countries in the region. They called it the platform 3+3, which potentially would include Turkey, Iran, Azerbaijan, Russia, Georgia, and Armenia. Georgia ruled out the participation in platform, saying that it will never cooperate with Russia. Armenia is also hesitant. Imagine now 4 worst autocracies in the region want to suffocate democratic Armenia. Putin's close cooperation with Turkish President Erdogan is well known. How about countries are cooperating in keeping the West out of the region? So
who's noticeable from that formulation?
The United States cooperating also during the war in Nagorno-Karabakh. Brian, please, your comment.
No, I mean, it's obviously an attempt to keep the West out of any solution. I mean, who is noticeably absent from that solution is the United States and Europe, which certainly have an interest in this. So I would expect Armenia to reject this. I'm very pleased that Georgia is rejecting this at this point, because I worry about the situation in Georgia at the moment with the Georgian Dream and with Bidzina Ivanishvili, who we all know how close he is to the Russians. And I was worried in this sense that Georgia would kind of go more in the direction of Moscow in this situation. They have not. Which was a very, very encouraging sign. But this is clearly an attempt by Russia to exclude the West from any settlement there. Russia's obviously made a calculation that it can control the Caucasus without the goodwill of Armenia, which is what it had in the past. And so I think they've made a calculation. I think it's a wrong calculation, but they seem to have made a calculation. But if you look at the broad stroke of this, Russia is losing in many different places at the same time. I mean, the Russian brinksmanship on the Ukrainian border is testament to the fact that our policy in Ukraine has been working, and that Ukraine's policy has been working in terms of resisting Russia. We saw what just happened last year in Moldova, with the election of Maya Sandu, with a huge majority in parliament for a pro-Western government there. We see Russia losing Armenia right now. So I'm seeing Russia losing on a lot of fronts. And one thing you can see, you can interpret Putin's actions right now as panic, actually.
And you probably know already that Charles Michel invited both presidents, Armenia and Azerbaijan, Aliyev and Pashinyan, to Brussels. Just before that, just after that announcement, Putin invited both leaders to Sochi to preempt what's going to happen in Brussels, saying that he agreed. He talked to Charles Michel, and they agreed on many things. So he welcomes that meeting. It seems to me that he's really anxious. Whatever West is trying to do in South Caucasus to pacify the situation or to build some bridges between the countries or to come with large-scale humanitarian assistance. That Russia is just standing on a way or trying to, to do something, to prevent that from happening. Yeah.
The extent that Armenia can resolve its problems with its neighbors independent of Russia is only a good thing, because it would reduce the leverage that Russia has over Armenia. Russia's always had this leverage over Armenia because of Karabakh, and because the Azerbaijani armed forces are so much bigger than the Armenian, and then Armenia had to rely on Russia for its defense. This gave Russia a lot of undue influence in Armenia, and the extent that Armenia can talk to Azerbaijan without Russia at the table, this will only reduce Russia's influence. There's another factor in this equation, though, that we have to kind of consider, and that is the policy debate that's going on in the United States right now. All of these things are only going to work with an active and engaged United States. And the problem is that there is a debate going on right now in Washington about where the attention of U.S. foreign policy should be. And there's a faction in the administration that would like to have all of the focus on China, and to kind of park the Russia problem, make the Russia problem be quiet. This was the thinking behind President Biden's summit meeting with Putin in Geneva in June, and this worries me, because I want to see a United States that's engaged in the Caucasus, that's engaged in Eastern Europe, because if the United States is away, the Russians will play. And this is something we have to be very, very concerned about. So there are those of us in Washington that are saying, okay, China first. We agree with that. China is the biggest threat right now, but not China alone, not only China. We cannot just pretend the Russia problem isn't there. So there's a pretty serious debate going on in Washington right now over where the attention of the United States should be. Should it be exclusively on China, or should there be some attention on Russia? I think Russia's kind of changing the equation right now by its actions in Ukraine and bringing the attention of the United States back to the former Soviet Union and back to Eastern Europe, which is actually at the end of the day not, a good thing. I hope we don't have a war in Ukraine, but by Russia's actions right now in Ukraine, in the Caucasus, it's kind of brought the attention of the U.S. foreign policy establishment back to that part of the world, which I think is a positive thing.
And the new constitutional amendments will allow Putin to stay in power even after 2024. Will he really stay in power, or he can hand it over to Medvedev or someone else who will make sure that Putin is pulling the string?
Yeah, I expect him to stay in power. If he wanted to hand it over to someone else, he would have made a different kind of constitutional amendment. Although I do think he always has Medvedev, who is his loyal little puppy dog, to put in power if he needs to. But I expect him to stay. I expect him to attempt to stay in power. And this is happening Russian society is changing dramatically right now. Putin has really lost the support of the cities. He's lost the support of urban professionals, and he's really lost support of the younger generation. He's lost really the support of the Russians in their 20s and their 30s. I mean, they've only known Putin as president, and they're kind of tired of him. And they've traveled, they speak foreign languages, they consume foreign media and foreign entertainment, and they kind of see themselves as this kind of global generation, and they don't really like the way things are in Russia right now. I mean, imagine if you're 20 in Russia, you've only known one president, really, just Putin. By the time I was 20, I knew 6, right? So, if you think about it. And so the Russians in their 20s and their 30s are turning against Putin. And I think, he has all of the kind of quote-unquote constitutional means to keep himself in power indefinitely, but he's losing particularly the young people, and the young people are the future.
Yeah, and the U.S. Congress adopted a resolution which will delegitimize Putin.
Yeah.
In case he's elected president in 2024. Will this work, or is just a resolution that could be ignored?
I'm glad the Congress did that, because I'm tired of playing this game of pretending that Putin is like an elected legitimate president and that Lukashenko is an elected legitimate president of Belarus. I'm glad we're not playing this silly game anymore, but it's largely symbolic. I don't even think we should call Russian elections elections. They're not elections. The Soviet Union had things they called elections, and those weren't elections. And I even argued when we were colleagues at RFERL that we shouldn't cover Russian quote-unquote elections as if they were real elections, because they're not. We should cover them the way we paid attention to Soviet elections. The Soviet Union had elections, but nobody took them seriously. We shouldn't take Russia's elections seriously. They're not elections, and it's an insult to real elections to call their elections actual elections. So I'm glad the Congress made this step.
And also, last question about Turkey. You were following what was happening in the region. Turks played really crucial role in Armenia's defeat. But there is also another dynamic, like close cooperation between two autocrats, Erdogan and Putin, which really hurts Western alliance, NATO, and other all kinds of cooperation that the West had with Turkey. With the change of Erdogan, the dynamic in the region will change dramatically, I believe.
Yeah.
What do you see? Do you see now a lot of protests are going on in Turkey because of Turkish currencies falling dramatically?
Yeah.
And what's happening there? Are you following that event? What's your thought on
the news? I'm hopeful because we don't have a Turkey problem. We have an Erdogan problem. And this is creating a big problem for NATO because Turkey is a really important NATO ally. They're the second largest military in NATO after the United States, crucial to the security of the Black Sea. And under Erdogan, they've been very, very obstructionist in that regard in terms of the security of the Black Sea. They've been more playing Russia's game. So I'm hopeful. I mean, I'm following the protests. I think it's possible that Erdogan could fall. Remember, these autocratic regimes always look rock solid until the moment they fall. So I don't rule it out. And I think, yes, Erdogan leaving the scene would be, in my opinion, a very positive thing for the security of the region, for the cohesion of NATO, and for thwarting Putin's imperial ambitions in the former Soviet space.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Brian. Thank you. It was really, really very interesting. Thank you very much.
Very great to see you. It feels like old times.
Yeah.